To make our game work correctly, we're going to need to modify some of these meshes to make them into different types of object that Godot recognises and can do different things with. Most games heavily rely on collisions, that is when one object is touching or overlapping with another, and it can be used to detect things like whether a player is stood on the floor or whether they're in the air. It can detect things like whether something's been picked up or perhaps an enemy has hit the player, all sorts of things. And in Godot, we have several types of object that work in different ways depending on your needs. We'll start with the player. So here in the player scene that I've accessed just by pressing this tab, we can come over here and we can see all the different bits that make up our player. At the moment, our player is what's called a spatial object. Spatial objects are useful for lots of things like platforms or decorations, things that are static. However, they're not very good for a character or a player because we can't control them. In order to make our player work, we need to change this from a spatial type by choosing change type. I've right-clicked and choose change type. And from this list, we're going to choose kinematic body. You can start to type these things here, and it should show up in the list here. Double-click it. We can see now that the little icon has changed. Instead of a circle, it's now got this little stick person. We've also got a warning, and if we press the little warning triangle, it will come up and it says that the node has no shape, so it can't collide or interact with other objects, which is obviously a problem. So we need to make a collision shape. To do that, with our player mesh selected, we can press plus and choose collision shape. And now I double click that. We can see that the warning sign has gone here, but now there's one here. This one is explaining that a shape must be provided. So with collision shape selected, we can look at the inspector and see its properties. And the first thing that we get to change really is this shape option. And so we choose the most suitable shape for our character. I could choose a box, and you can see it's placed a box there, and I can scale that up and down and front and back. And I can scale that in different directions to make it fit the character. There are different options to choose from here, and I'm going to choose a capsule shape. It may be a little difficult to see. I'll just pull it out here. So you can see that capsule shape just in wireframe there. And you can also see this gizmo that sits around it. Across the top here, we've got several buttons. This arrow button will show up that gizmo when you select an object. So I can click the objects in the list here, and the gizmo will show me which one that I'm working on. If you only want to do one type of transform, you can press W for moving, E for rotation, or R for scale. If you want to scale it uniformly, you simply put your cursor away from the object, not over a specific axis, and click and drag. In this case, I will undo so that it sits centrally again. I'm going to begin by rotating this 90 degrees, and you'll be able to see in the bottom corner of the screen that I'm holding down Control and it's snapping it in 5-degree increments until I get to 90. Then I should be able to just grab this little orange dot here and stretch that upwards, scaling it in that y-axis, the up and down axis in Godot. And you can see it pokes just below the feet there. And then I'll get this one here, which is going to change its diameter, and something like that. It's up to you how close you want this to the body. Don't go too far away, otherwise the collisions will look funny, and things will collide when they apparently aren't anywhere near each other. But equally, you might want to resize it if your game is too difficult. You want to give players a little bit of leeway. So for example, I could have this take into account the arms of the character, but actually I'm just going to put it around the body area, give the players a bit more of a chance. So making sure that the collision shape fits nicely around our object, we can see that all those warning signs have gone now. If you see a little asterisk at the end of the file name of the scene that you're working on, if you see an asterisk at the end of the scene file name here, it means that this scene has been altered but not saved. So we can just press Command and S or Control and S to save that. or of course choose Scene and Save Scene. If it helps, we can move these tabs around, but hopefully you've given them sensible names so it's easy to see what's what. So I'll continue now with the other objects, changing their type and adding collision where necessary. So the next one I'll come to is this, the thing that chases you. This is going to be animated. It will move along and follow the player, and if the player moves too slowly, it will catch them and restart the game. And I want the collision shape to match this triangle here. So by choosing the mesh, I can create a collision shape based on the mesh by choosing Mesh, Create Single Convex Collision Sibling. And if you look closely, you can see that there is a blue shape. I'll just turn that off. There we are. You can see the blue outline of the triangle there as the collision object. However, we have a warning. Collision shape only serves to provide a collision shape to a collision object derived node. And it says here that we can only use it as a child of area, static body, rigid body, or kinematic body, or similar nodes to give them a shape. We can't use it with this spatial. One of the things that we can use, and that I am going to use, so I'm going to change type to an area. Areas are very useful because they don't have any physics of their own, so they don't go flying off or being affected by gravity unless you want them to. And it's easy to check whether it has hit the player. And this is the format that we'll use for most of the things that we're going to collide with. Next, I will do this falling triangle, so it's just another triangle, and in this case it will be animated to fall down when the player gets to a certain area. Think about, stalactites in a cave in some platform games you see where they fall down. So as you can see, this is just a triangle. In the game, this is going to fall down as the player passes, and if it hits them, restart the game. Using exactly the same method, we can choose the mesh, and then up here in mesh, we create a single convex collision sibling. It's made our blue triangle. We've got the same warning thing, which means that we have to change this spatial to an area and save the scene. I've just noticed I haven't saved the chaser scene, so I'll just pop back and save that. The spikes and the trap I'll do next. You can see in the spikes object here that I've got this animation player node, and this is what comes in if you have anything on the NLA editor in Blender, and you'll see that if I move this timeline, those spikes go up and down. And this does present a bit of an issue in Godot with collision. So to solve it, I'm going to remove this animation player altogether by right-clicking and choosing Delete Node and confirming that. This is now just a static object. I'm also going to reposition it at 0, 0, 0 here in the transform panel. That will place it directly in the center of the world and help us with collision. Now we can treat it in the same way as we have done with previous objects by choosing Mesh, Create Single Convex Collision Sibling, and you'll see here that it's created a sort of trapezoid around these objects, which is great because it means that if the player's anywhere within this blue trapezoid, it will trigger off the collision. Just as before, it can only provide a collision shape to these different types of object, and so we need to change it to an area node. And there we go, the warning's gone, and we can save that file. Onto the trap. As we can see, this one doesn't have any animation, but it does need its collision mesh, so we'll choose Mesh, Create Single Convex Collision Sibling, and again change the root node to an area and save that file. Next up, we've got the goal. This one has an animation player with it as well, and in this case we're going to keep the animation. As you can see, in this case what it does is just scale up and scale down, so it will appear to pulse. There's a couple of things we need to do here. If we want our animation to loop, we need to press this button here, and as you can see now, it will continuously play. We also want it to start doing that as soon as the game loads. And to do that, we can press this button here, Autoplay on load. And so now that will just sit there pulsing away, waiting for the player to hit it. As before, we need to go to our mesh here. And in this case, we can add a collision shape that is shaped like a box. And you can see that that has fitted neatly around here. However, I can resize that if I need to by pressing R and then just clicking and dragging like that. I may make it a little larger just so the player has got more chance of actually hitting it. I've made it a collision shape box in this instance because it's not a complicated shape, so we don't need to work out the convex mesh to collide with. In this case, because I had the goal selected when I made the collision shape or added the collision shape, it's added the collision shape to the goal, and actually this won't work as we want it to. This collision shape needs to be grabbed and dragged so that it sits as a child of the goal mesh. We can then change that to an area, and that will now work as expected, so we'll save that file. The same goes for the pickup. This is also animated. We can see that animation there just spinning away. Again, we want this to loop and to start playing automatically. And this time, if I choose the pickup mesh, the root object, and add the collision shape to that, and choose box, and I think I'll just make that a touch larger as well. And finally, change this pickup mesh spatial node to an area node, and save that. Finally, for this stage, we've got the platform. The platform isn't going to move, it's not going to be animated, it doesn't have any physics, and so we can use what's called a static body. So we can use a static body instead of this spatial here. So we can change that to static body. We've got a warning here that it has no collision shape, and so just as before, we'll choose the platform here. In this case, to make the collision mesh, I'm going to choose mesh and create tri-mesh static body. And you can see that this handily covers only the mesh and actually leaves this gap here collision free, so the player could possibly fall down there. In this case, I've made the collision shape again in the platform, so I just need to drag that out and put it as a child of the platform mesh. And I can actually just remove this static body. So you can see here we've got our mesh, we've got the collision shape, and our root node is a static body. And then we can save our platform. Now it's time to start putting these things together in our actual game scene. To make our game scene, I'm going to press the plus button here. If it helps, you can close these tabs so that it clears up the screen a little bit. We can always open them again very easily. And so here we are with a new empty scene in which to put all of our game assets. So we'll begin by making the scene have a spatial root node. To do that, we can just click on 3D scene here. And I'm going to rename this main, because this is going to be where all of our stuff takes place, our main game. And I can begin to bring in assets by choosing this chain link button to link objects. So here I'm selecting the platform from the assets folder and choosing open. And you can see that that has added that to my game scene. I can do the same thing for the other objects. If I click on main, each object that I link in will be a child of the main scene. So I'll press the link button and I'll just bring in the items one by one as the chaser, and you can position them roughly if you like where you want them to be, if you know. So I want the chaser to be starting around there somewhere. Click on main and choose the link button. If these aren't quite the right size when they come in, don't worry, you can resize them fairly easily. In Blender, I made sure the origin of all of these objects was at 0, 0, 0, and this really helps with placing them here. They're not sort of offset in weird ways or anything like that. So if you've got objects that are not appearing quite where you think they should, you may want to go back to Blender, just reset their point of origin and re-import them before you go on any further. So I'll place the goal here at the end of the level, and you can spin round your world just to position them. I'll bring the remaining objects here. So there's the pickup. You can see that actually I've neglected to be clicking on main here before bringing these objects in. Not a massive deal. Before we go too much further though, I will just drag them out and drop them onto the main node. Here's the pickup. I shall move that somewhere around here. Let's bring in the player. There's our player. I'll put that in the starting position. We've got a trap here, so perhaps I'll put that around here somewhere. Obviously you can adjust these so they sit correctly on your level. And finally the spikes. And I'll position them just over here, like so. We can duplicate these, so we can have the same objects being repeated throughout the level, multiple pickups, multiple traps, etc. But it's a good idea just to start with one, code them, and then duplicate them where you need them. It also just makes for a cleaner environment to work in. So make sure you've brought all your objects in and got them arranged in your main scene, which we still need to save. So I'll choose scene, save scene as. It offers us the file name here, main. I'm happy with that, so I will press save. The next stage will be to add code to these objects to make them work. We'll start with the player, getting them moving around, and then we'll start to look at some of these pickups and obstacles after that.